Hey guys, welcome to another video for anatomy and physiology. In this video, I'm supplementing the lecture that I did today with the skull anatomy. So we're going to highlight some of the features that I want you to know. Recall that I mentioned that these features have a very specific purpose, and that's because they're going to play an important role in helping you to understand things that we're going to see later on. You're going to see these features, these landmarks show up again later on when we discuss the cardiovascular, the nervous system, and muscular system. So I highlighted these terms, these landmarks, so that we can have a more long-term understanding of what's happening in the body. So let's go ahead and start off with the skull. We're going to look at the cranial bones. Okay, actually I already did a video on those, but I'm highlighting them right now so that you know that these are bones that you're going to be held accountable for, all the cranial bones along with the facial bones. And we will highlight individual bones in just a minute and their landmarks. So let's keep going. All right, so again, we have the occipital, that's on the posterior side of the skull. The parietal, okay, you have the sagittal sulcus right here, splitting up the parietal temple, or the parietal bone. Then you have the temporal bone, okay, your frontal, the sphenoid, that's more in depth. It's a more profound bone, but it also has a surface feature. Okay, and recall that this is important in knowing these now, because later on when we talk about the brain and we talk about certain regions of the brain, they're named after the bone, the cranial bones that cover them. And then we have the ethmoid bone. All right, so let's go ahead and highlight the occipital landmarks first. And the first landmark that I want you to take note of is the foramen magnum. Again, this is the largest foramen in the body, in particular in the skull. This is where the spinal cord will come through, and the brain stem right here. Okay, the foramen magnum. And then secondly, you have your occipital condyles. So recall that the occipital condyles will sit on the atlas. Okay, and that's what causes the head to bob yes and no. In fact, let me go to that real quick. Okay, so here we have a skull. I'm going to zoom in here. So this is the atlas that you're looking at. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the atlanto-occipital capsule. This is a ligament I'm going to get rid of. Let me hide that. I'm going to hide this one too. Okay, this is a posterior ligament. All right, so let me center it also. So here's the atlas. And one thing that I want you to take note of is the occipital condyle. So that condyle sits on the superior surface. Okay, the superior surface here of this atlas, and that's kind of like a ball and socket joint almost, and that allows the head movement of you shaking your head yes and no. I'm sorry, yes. The no aspect of it is the bond between the atlas and the axis. Okay, but I discussed that in the earlier video. Can I see it there? Let me experiment here. Oh yeah, you can see it there. You can see the dens. Cool. And then you have the transverse ligament. So I can't help myself. I'm going to go ahead and talk about it just a little bit. So recall how you can shake your head yes, no. Sorry. Let me back up here. Okay, and that's because of this particular atlantoaxial joint. And here's the dens. Okay, of the atlas, and you can see it's protruding through into the anterior part of the atlas, and then you have the ligament that ties it together and allows it to kind of turn on its axis. Okay, now one of the dangerous things about this is that if you hit somebody on the top of the head hard enough, you can actually cause this dens to go into the brain, because look where it's sitting. It's sitting right below the foramen magnum. Okay. All right, well, let me back up now. Okay, so where was I? I believe I was at the inferior nuchal line. Let's go to that. Okay, so remember the nuchal ligament, okay? This is the inferior nuchal line, and this is the superior nuchal line. This is the inferior nuchal line. So remember that nuchal ligament that forms an attachment point for muscles in the back. And then lastly, we're looking at the occipital surface of the jugular foramen. Okay, so here's the occipital surface of the jugular foramen. In fact, let's go and see how that actually looks when you have the entire skull put together. So you'll see here I have the circulatory system here. I have the arteries. Okay, I don't have the veins in here. So I'm looking at the occipital surface. So I'm looking at the occipital over here. So let's zoom in. I'm looking at the occipital surface of the jugular foramen. Okay, and there it is. Let's zoom in. Let's turn it a little bit. Can we see here? Okay. Whoops. So here's the occipital surface of the jugular foramen. Now let me back up here. So again, this is the occipital side, right? There's the occipital surface. And later on, you're going to see the temporal side. So here's the temporal, and this will be the temporal surface, making the jugular foramen. Okay? So as you can see here, there it is, right in there. So here's the occipital side, and here's the temporal side, and then there's the foramen right there. I don't know if you can hear that. That's my bearded dragon running around. Okay, so let's go back to the skeletal now. So now I'm looking at the temporal landmark. So this is the temporal plate. All right, so here's a lateral view of it. Turning it, this is the superior view. And going down under, this is the inferior view. So going back to the lateral, so we have here the zygomatic arch. Okay, there's a zygomatic arch, or the zygomatic process. And then we have the mandibular fossa. So this is where the mandible, the mandibular condyle will fit itself in right there. Okay, so here it is right here. So we're looking at the temple, and this is the mandible, and the mandibular fossa is right there. Okay, and this is the condyle, mandibular condyle, and it fits right in there. And then here's your zygomatic process going into your cheekbone, your zygomatic. Okay, so let's go back. Oh, now we have the external acoustic meatus. Okay, so inside of here is where your hearing, your hearing's stored, your cochlea. So this is the external acoustic meatus, or the auditory meatus. And then we have the styloid process. Okay, the styloid process is a connection point for muscles. And then you have the mastoid process, again, another connection point for muscles, the mastoid. And then we have your carotid canal. Okay, here that is. So this is the carotid canal coming in from here. Your carotid artery will go in here, or vein. Okay, will go in here and then come up this way. This is the carotid canal. Okay, that does it for the temporal. And so here I'm looking at the frontal, and this is the frontal plate, and I don't have any big features that I'm going to highlight here. Okay, so we'll go ahead and move forward. Looking at this sphenoid, now I have some really important features here to show you that you will see. There's just three. There's a lot. There is a lot, as you can see, but we're just going to highlight three. We're going to look at the sia tertia. Okay, sia, remember the Latin word sia as in chair, so the sia tertia here. Okay, now let's go and look at what actually sits in there. I need to go to the brain for that. So here I have the nervous system. Okay, it might take me a second to actually get in here and look so we can find out what is actually working here. So I'm going to get rid of this. We're going to have to try and make it work here. So I'm going to get rid of the eyeball too. Let's see here. Not quite, huh? Here, actually, I think I can get rid of at least this part of the brain. Okay, the frontal lobe. Does that work? Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Perfect, actually. Okay, so I have the midbrain here. So this part of the brain has a lot of functions, and we'll address that later. But you'll notice here, I'm going to zoom in. Okay, you have here what's called the pars tubularis, the infundibulum, and what you have here is the posterior pituitary and the anterior pituitary, and the pituitary sits right here in the sia tertia. Okay, I don't know if you can tell here, so that's right here. The sia tertia is right here. This is the sphenoid, and this is the sia tertia, and you have the pituitary gland just sitting right there, and you can see right above it, actually, since we're right here anyways. Let's go ahead and check this out. See if I can center this properly. So right above the Cia tertia, you see there'll be a couple of foramens there that we're actually going to look at. And those foramens, this is the optic nerve. These are the optic nerves, and they go right through into those foramens, and then the optic nerve goes obviously into the eye right here. So I took the eye out, but it connects to the eye. Okay, so there's the optic foramen right there. Boom, right there. I can go back. So there's the optic foramen. There's the anterior part of it, and then here's the posterior part right there into the optic nerve. And again, just posterior to that, you have Cia tertia, the pituitary gland. Okay. Actually, we can talk about the superior orbital fissures. So you can see here you have a lot of orbital, you have a lot of nerves that are going through. You have the ophthalmic, ocular motor, which controls muscles of the eye, and the trochlear nerve too. So we have a lot of nerves here that control the eye movement, and I address those later. But they all go through your superior orbital fissure right here. So again, this is all the sphenoid, and these are the three features. We have the Cia tertia, okay, optic foramen, and the superior orbital fissure. Okay, so that's the sphenoid. And lastly, we're going to go to the ethmoid bone. Not a lot here, so this is a lot of your nasal structures, okay, on the inside, the profound nasal structure, so you really have to get into the skull to find it. So we have here the crista galli and the cribriform plate. And I mentioned to you in lecture what the cribriform plate does. You see those holes? That's where the olfactory nerves go through, and they go right into your nasal cavity. Okay, right into your nasal cavity. So the molecules go into your nose, into the nasal cavity, and then they activate those olfactory nerves, allowing you to smell. Okay, right here. And then we have the middle nasal concha, creating the walls for the nasal cavity in your nose. All right, well, I said that was last but not least, but actually not quite. If you remember this from the lecture 2, we have the different sutures. We have the squamous, that creates the border between the parietal and the temporal. The lambdoid suture, which is between the parietal and the occipital. The coronal, think corona, think crown, okay, on the frontal lobe, on the front, on the anterior aspect of the skull. And then we have the sagittal. That's a sagittal cut, so that's like right down the middle. Okay, so the sagittal cut, that creates the border between the two parietals. Okay, guys, I think that does it for the skull anatomy. Thanks for watching and listening, and good luck in your studying.